there, folks. I'm Emily.
And I'm Elk. And we are coming to you live from our mother's basement because basements are for everyone.
Beautifully said, Elt. Thank you so much for that inclusive statement. We here at Oh My Word are about, I was going to say inclusion, but that's not true. In fact, we're very much about exclusion when it comes to content that is not clean or age appropriate, because that's our focus. We review and promote clean, age appropriate entertainment. Books, movies, plays, musicals, etc. We explore the content and the plots so that you, the consumer, whether you are a parent or the actual consumer of the content, know what's in the content that you're consuming. Is it clean? Is it age appropriate? Does it have positive messaging? We rate the entertainment based upon our pearl clutching scale. We have 3 different scales. We have one for violence, language, and romance, and it is on a 0 to 4 rating. 0 being clean and kid-friendly and G-rated, and 4 being basically NC-17.
Right. Now, we should also explain that we don't specifically only review clean stuff. We review stuff to see what its cleanliness, quote-unquote, factor is.
Yes, good point. We oftentimes are reviewing the latest and most popular, especially young adult novels and movies, though we also review middle grade books and movies, musicals, which are really for any age.
Or not, depending on what's in the musical.
True. Music Man for everyone. Next to Normal, maybe not so much. Rent, ooh.
And Mamma Mia, definitely not.
Mamma Mia, definitely not. So that is correct. We review everything and we let you know. That's why we have the pearl clutching scale, so we can let you know what it has. And then it's up to you to make your own choice. If you are specifically looking for things that are a bunch of 4s, then you know where to find it. And if you're looking for stuff that's cleaner and more appropriate for younger audiences, then we'll also bring you some of that.
For example, we don't really have a seg to today. For our segment for today, that's the segue. For today, we're going to talk about, even though these books came out a while ago, and also the film came out a while ago, we read the first book only. We read the first book recently, and I also saw the film, Vampire Academy by Richelle Mead, and it was published in 2007. So a while ago, there's like a bunch of books in the series, and it was one of these big fan favorites that when other people try to read it, they're like, what is going on here? Like, even when the film came out in 2014, it didn't do really well, but the fans really loved it. So they were trying to do like some sort of crowdfunding to like get a sequel going, and they could not raise enough money for it.
Really?
Because I guess anybody who actually had money was like, why would we put it towards this second film? Even though something being good and something that people love are not always the same thing, as we know in life. Anyways, the short of it is, Lisa Dragomir is a Moroi so basically she's a vampire princess. And Rose Hathaway is, if we're pronouncing this correctly, a Dhampir. So she's sort of, like, she has like vampire blood in her, but she's not like an actual vampire. So she's the guardian in training. Her job is to protect the vampire. And there's a bunch of them. So there's all these like Dhampir people that their job is to protect the vampires from the evil people who want to kill out all these vampires, the Strigoi. It starts off with Rose kind of trying to spirit away Lissa away from the school, the Vampire Academy, roll credits, because the school was so controlling, and the school this, that, whatever, and she didn't feel like the school could keep them safe, and they finally track them down, and they bring them back to the school where you gotta be. They have some interesting details in it, like the way classes always start at night because everyone sleeps during the daytime.
Mm-hmm.
So they do go with that kind of vampire, being only awake in the dark. And you see like regular classes going on, it's dark outside. Even though for Rose, light and dark doesn't matter to her. You do see that the vampires have to feed. It's usually people who volunteer for when they're on the road. Then Rose was the feeder, I guess you could say, which is kind of looked down upon because apparently when the vampire feeds on you, you get this high, that's not considered a good place to be at.
Yeah, they make it like a drug, kind of.
Yeah.
Like the people who are feeders are basically like drug addicts because they get such a high that they keep coming back for. I did like some of her creativity in this book, as we've talked about with other fantasy novels that we've reviewed. People sometimes get upset when authors take liberty with fantasy genres, but since vampires aren't real, I don't see why an author shouldn't be able to make his or her own rules about how the vampires in their world work. For instance, with Twilight, if vampires are sparkly, then vampires are sparkly. Because who cares? Because vampires aren't real. So they can be whatever Stephenie Meyer wants. So in this case, with Rochelle Mead coming up with the feeding and the fact that these vampires have different schools of magic that magic domains that they specialize in. Usually vampires don't have magic, but in this world they do. And that's cool because, again, vampires aren't real. So good on Rochelle for coming up with something to make them a little bit different.
Right, because it's like an element, and they
Right.
don't each have the same elemental sort of magic. Right, there's like a water one, a fire one.
Earth,
Yeah.
fire, yeah.
Yeah, so you do have that. Our ratings for it, how many pearls we got to be clutching. So many pearls.
kinda clutchy.
Not just because of the awfulness. Yeah, there's part of it, I don't know if it's the right word for it, but it's almost kind of like campy, or like sort of like the way that like a B horror film, like you know it's going to be ridiculous, but you kind of participate in it for the ridiculousness of it, so just so you could like hate on it and make fun of it. I don't want to, not to bash anybody, but it's sort of, that's what Vampire Academy sort of felt like for me. Like I knew it was not my thing. I don't really do the vampire thing so much. Not because there's not good stuff out there, but that's not what I'm usually going to gravitate toward. And the film was just, it was just so ridiculous, some parts of it. So it was just kind of, like I was laughing, I think, more than I was supposed to, but just because of like the ridiculousness of some of it. So violence, we gave it a 2 because there's beating upness, there's death, there's not anything gory.
Fighting, which is, right. I mean, that's part of it because she's a guardian, so she's doing all this martial arts, and then they are being pursued. So there's some fighting, but it's not graphic.
Right. Language is 4 because all the words happen.
And needlessly.
Yeah, it just felt, because she's supposed to be this like bad girl sort of thing.
Yeah.
Even though she's a little bit of like an idiot.
Yes.
She's like because she's so headstrong, and like, so yeah, being headstrong can benefit you when it's like, I'm not going to give up and I'm going to keep going. That's all good stuff. But when it's like, oh, look, I could take you down, but like, no, you can't. then you're just an idiot. Romance is a 3.5 because no one actually sleeps together, but they almost get there. There's another like Dampier, his name is Dimitri, that she's all over him, and there's so much boy crushing going on. Lisa also has her romantic interest, but they end up with no clothes on, like just in their underwear at one point, under this like spell situation.
Yes, and the issue with that is that she's 17 and he's 24, and while they are getting hot and dirty with each other because of a spell that they're under, nonetheless, that is still incredibly inappropriate and wrong for an adult and a teen to be doing that together and for it to be described. So that pushes it up to 3.5 and not quite a 4 because they don't actually do it. If they had actually done it, we would have given it a 4, but we had to bring it up higher than a 3 because it's not appropriate. Adults and children, that's not okay, ever, period.
But I was looking into some of the other books just to like see. I was like, oh, this is a whole series. Like, where do you go from here?
Why do you go from
Rose ends up with like 4 different guys until she finally like comes back to Dimitri. I mean, there's all these like plot things and whatever, but like she ends up with this guy, she's in love with this guy, she's in love with this guy, spoiler, she ends up with Dimitri. So I guess at that point maybe she's a little bit older, but it's like there's so much romance and it's so sensual to all the romance.
Oh, because they're not supposed to be together because they're going to be
they can't reproduce or something,
and they're supposed to be working together.
them.
Yeah, so it would distract them from their job, but obviously they have such a strong attraction to each other. I don't know why she didn't just choose to have it be another student in the school. You know, or that Rose is already 18 and a senior or something. It could have just been a little bit.
I mean, I still don't want to see them taking each other's clothes off, but yeah.
No, but I'm more okay if it's 2 consenting adults than an adult and a teenager. I mean, good on him. At least he does once they get out from under the spell. He says, like, this is not happening. I'm an adult. But then he also kind of gives in and says that he has real feelings. So,
Right, because the spell has to be based on something sort of thing. Like, it can only amplify what's already there. So, like, oh, he did admit to liking her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also the film, it's so bad. It's just, actually, the person who plays Rose Hathaway, which I guess is Zoe Deutsch, or whoever that's pronounced, she sort of, like, plays like a Ryan Reynolds, sort of, like, fast-talking, kind of like the way his, like, signature sort of, like, comedy with that fast-talking undertone, talking.
Yeah.
So she kind of plays it like that. So, you know, whether or not you like that, but like the Dimitri character, like no offense to the actor, but he's putting on this like thick Russian accent. And you have no idea what he's saying. It's very labored, his speech. And you're just like, it becomes like a little bit stagnant. Like there's very little inflection in it because he's trying to do this like Russian accent that's just not working. I mean,
You know, I didn't see the movie, so I can't comment on that, but from the book, it has an interesting premise. I love seeing different schools for fantastical creatures because we get to see an interesting world. So there's a lot of setup, like you said, their classes are at night, which works for the vampires. They have lunch, they have the feeders. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, but the pacing is off and the writing is it's just not good. Good writing is one of those things that is not so easy to define, but you know it when you see it. The difference between a book like this and I'm trying to think of something that we've reviewed where just the writing itself was so good, but there's just a really big difference between good writing and bad writing. And this, unfortunately, is just, I'll give it mediocre. It's nothing special, but...
I mean, you could burn...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You can burn through the book pretty quickly because there's not anything to slow your reading of it. So maybe that's also why it could just be like a fan favorite because... You just get to read about vampires and like people falling in love, but there's not any real substance to it. Which I don't know that there's necessarily supposed to be.
Right.
So.
It probably served its purpose, which was teenagers, especially teenage girls, like vampires. They like vampires with romance. That's what this book is. And if you're looking for I read it in a couple of hours. If you're looking for something like that, this is that book. And you might even be intrigued to read the rest of them because once you get into the story, the characters are interesting enough. You might want to see what else happens. And there's some crime, adventure thing going on, but it's just mediocre writing. And it's interesting the more you read to realize that you can actually notice the difference between good and bad writing. You have to read a lot.
Like Strange the Dreamer.
Yes, exactly.
Laini Taylor is beautiful, but she's also an exception. Her writing is very lyrical. That's true. That's
or
exception.
Shane. We talked about Shane. That's just good writing. He could probably write about anything and it would be good. Rochelle Mead can write about vampires because that's the thing she really likes, but she probably couldn't write about much else because her writing itself isn't good. I don't know.
Rose is also like instead of being the bad boy, she's the bad girl who's like cycles through boyfriends and like, dresses really, which usually that's not necessarily your protagonist. Usually that's like the protagonist's friend.
Yes, that's true.
And here it's actually the protagonist. Like Lissa is not the protagonist who's like the princess and the good girl. It's Rose who's the protagonist, and she's just like all over the place. She's got this chip on her shoulder, and she is just like in everyone's face, and she doesn't back down from anything. Which again, sometimes makes her a little bit
annoying.
Stupid.
Yes.
And annoying, and a little bit much. You're like, hey, slow down and just use your brain for a second, please. It does make it a little bit different when you do things like that. So you got that going for it.
No, you're not reading it for anything substantive. You're reading it because it's a lazy Sunday afternoon and you just want to read a book and enjoy the sun outside. And for that, it works.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. So yeah, Vampire Academy. That's that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Cheers, people.
Oh My Word Podcast is brought to you by the pearl-clutching basement dwellers at Oh My Word. Follow us on Instagram for updates at Oh My Word Podcast or like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For full episode notes and detail, visit eltenenbaum.com. Music is by Tim Berg. Sound is by Gabriel Yaffe. See you next time.